It's a pleasure to introduce our moderator, Kate Gilmore. I believe that we are still trying to connect with her. This is the age of technology. It's not always possible to go to our speakers at the time that we want to go to them. So in the meantime, I'll just read some of the comments that you have
ready. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Okay. I was still waiting for the message. The last time I checked, we're doing a sound check with you. So I've been, going along thinking that you're not with us. Thank you so much for your intervention. Thank you.
But you're making much more sense than I will. So please go on.
I doubt that very much. So let me just tell people who you are, Kate. You've got a sterling resume, so I'm not going to go through all of it. But Kate is a fellow with the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, Harvard University. She's also chair of International Planned Parenthood Federation's Board of Trustees and a board member of Interpeace, I beg your pardon, and her advocacy for the advance and application of human rights standards and norms extends over decades. And she was working most recently as the United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights and was previously with UNFPA, who joined us in one of the plenaries yesterday. Kate, we can't wait to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Ready. Thank you so very much and welcome, everybody. Welcome to the very best plenary session ever. I know there's been 2 others, and I know they've done so well. In fact, that youth plenary had so much energy, vibrance, and vision that it was moving and inspiring. But everybody online, you've chosen to turn up at the very best of the plenary sessions. I promise you, it is going to be exciting, inspiring, moving, and challenging with your help, that is. What we're going to do is we're going to hear from our fantastic panelists, and they are people sitting right at the heart of intersectionality, the struggle for a gender equality that takes into consideration the diversity of identity and of experience, of place and issue in a way that really challenges our fixed ideas about gender binary, or our fixed ideas about North and South, or our fixed ideas about how social change can come about. So we're enormously privileged to have such a fantastic panel. And they're going to poke away at us, challenge us, and inspire us first. But then with the help of the wonderful audience, participants online, we're going to take your questions and develop a thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation together. So thank you for exercising such wonderful taste as to choose to be with us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Congratulations, MenEngage. Thank you, fabulous MenEngage team. Thank you, partners in the Global Symposium. Thank you, gorgeous interpreters, for being so damn smart. And thank you, wonderful panelists, for coming into the grooviest, the most hip and happening panel that anyone on high has ever put together. Okay, so I thought we'd kick off not with long-winded introductions, because these people are, look, they're shining stars in the galaxy of human rights defense. But I'd love to hear from each and every one. And I think I'm going to start with Sanam, because Sanam really knows how to crack on with things. And Sanam, the thing I want to start with, when on earth, what's your earliest memory of gender? When did you first learn that there was such a thing as gender? Can you remember? And I'm going to be ruthless, I should say, with timekeeping, only to keep us going on so everyone has a chance to go, chance to speak. But Sanam, off you go. First memories of gender.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate. Loving your energy. And although I feel like you've oversold us a little bit, so now we have to be like, oh, we have to be our best selves. We have to deliver on this amazingness that you promised.
I believe in you. Let's go.
My name is Sanam. I'm really privileged and proud to be part of a wonderful range of intersectional feminist movements for these last few years. And to your question, which I was thinking about, I think it was when I was a child and I wasn't allowed to wear shorts. Shorts were not allowed to be part of my wardrobe because me and my sister, we were two girls, and our male cousins were allowed to wear shorts and were allowed to run around, and it felt so unfair that we had to wear full-length pants and full-length trousers and traditional clothes that were much more constricted, and we couldn't run around and have the same kind of freedoms that our male classmates, and I am really talking from a cisgender perspective, which is how I'm remembering my childhood. I apologize for that, not super inclusive at this moment, but it did bring that moment of, when you're a child, your bodies are not that different. The developmental stages of puberty haven't happened yet, and you're just so frustrated that you can't do all of the things that that you see other kids are doing. And at that time, it doesn't register what's male or female. It's that early moment of what I found out later at university from studying Judith Butler is called gender performativity. And yeah, it was frustrating as a child, and I think I still hold on to that frustration as an adult, and sympathize when I meet others of different non-conforming identities about what that means. So yeah,
Sanam, that's fantastic. It starts early, and it starts as a costume, almost a disguise. Brilliant. Carme, hola. Thank you for being up so early. Carme, when did you first encounter gender? What's your earliest memory?
My earliest memory, probably around 7, when... hablo en español, ahorita disculpen. Mis primeras memorias fueron cuando tenía unos 7 años, vivíamos en un 3er piso y no me dejaban bajar a la calle a jugar porque era una niña. Solo mi hermano podía bajar. Nosotros no teníamos bicicletas porque eran muy caras, muy costosas tener una bicicleta. Yo quería aprender a ir en bicicleta, pero no me dejaban. Entonces mi hermano sí podía bajar, que era menor. Sin embargo, yo me tenía que quedar en casa viendo cómo ellos jugaban a bicicleta. Y eso yo no entendía por qué. Y tampoco entendía por qué a mí me tocaba bajar las basuras o lavar trastes. Sin embargo, mi hermano no hacía nada de todo eso. Y cuando yo preguntaba, me decían, él no lo hace porque es hombre. Y me decía, ¿y eso? Entonces, esas son mis primeras memorias de que había algo distinto, que yo como niña tenía cosas que no podía hacer y al revés, otras que era obligatorio hacer. Por supuesto, yo no me consideraba feminista en ese momento, pero sí es parte de mi memoria, y hoy tengo un reto que es aprender a ir en bicicleta, porque nunca he podido aprender a ir en bicicleta. Entonces, es un reto personal aprender a ir en bicicleta. Gracias. Y gracias a MenEngage por la invitación. Sorry.
Carme, that's fantastic, because from the very get-go, even as a 7-year-old, you are straight on to questions of justice, straight on to questions of fairness, and you knew something was wrong, and you immediately began to question. I find that absolutely remarkable. Fantastic. Thank you so very much.
Thanks.
Righto. Carlos, help us out here. For you, when you think back, when did this thing called gender start to get in your way and start to be imposed, perhaps, on you? And welcome, Carlos.
Merci, Kate. Je vais m'exprimer en français. Ça va être plus facile pour moi parce que ce panel est tellement excitant que j'ai pas envie de me confondre dans les différents mots, les terminologies et tout ça. Et merci pour ta question. Et donc, la première fois que j'ai commencé à me questionner sur la question du genre, je crois que j'avais autour de 5 ans, voire même 4 ans. J'ai des souvenirs de faits assez marquants dans ma vie parce que je suis né dans une famille où j'ai beaucoup de sœurs. Et donc, quand je suis né, j'avais déjà 6 sœurs. Et donc, évidemment, mes sœurs s'occupaient de moi comme une petite fille. Et pour moi, il n'y avait pas de différence. Mais pour mes parents, évidemment, il y avait une différence, surtout pour mon père, qui avait tant attendu d'avoir un garçon et que finalement, ce garçon est arrivé, mais qui arrive parmi 6 filles. Et donc, évidemment, il y avait une inquiétude par rapport à comment ces filles-là allaient me traiter. Et donc, quand j'étais avec mes sœurs à la maison, elles m'habillaient en fille et déjà, mon père commençait à se dresser à ça. Mais le fait marquant qui a fait que je me suis posé la question par rapport aux gens, c'est quand j'ai vu la première fois mon père battre ma mère. Je crois que j'avais autour de cet âge-là, de 6 ans aussi. Quand il était en train de la battre, on était là en tant qu'enfant, on les regardait. Et puis je me suis dit, mais il la bat parce qu'il est plus fort qu'elle, ou il la bat parce que c'est lui qui a le pouvoir ici. Mais c'est beaucoup plus tard que je vais comprendre cette force, cette dynamique de pouvoir, cette différence entre hommes et femmes, et vraiment beaucoup plus tard, quand je suis arrivé à l'université. Le deuxième fait marquant, c'est par rapport à moi-même. Quand j'ai commencé à m'interroger sur mon orientation sexuelle et mon identité de genre. Et oui, je savais que j'étais différent des autres depuis l'école primaire parce que les étudiants dans mon école avaient commencé à m'intimider par rapport au fait que je sois très efféminé. Mais évidemment, je ne comprenais pas. Donc, pour moi, c'était de l'intimidation pure et simple. Parfois, ma mère essayait de prendre ma défense. D'autres fois, mon père aussi. Mais d'autres fois encore, mon père refusait parce qu'il me disait carrément qu'il fallait que je réplique si les étudiants de mon école m'intimident. Mais à cet âge-là, je ne pouvais pas comprendre c'était quoi l'intimidation. Je ne pouvais pas comprendre comment me défendre. Je ne pouvais pas comprendre non plus pourquoi et si j'étais effectivement efféminé. Et donc, je naviguais au milieu de de toute cette confusion-là. Et c'est en grandissant au fur et à mesure dans ma phase d'adolescence que j'ai commencé à vraiment m'interroger sur la différence entre les genres et les orientations sexuelles.
Thank you so much, Carlos. You know, by letting us into the privilege of your lived experience of the very issues that sit at the heart of what we're talking about today, and by giving us such intimate understanding, you have really given us a gift of being reminded how intimate and so close to our hearts is gender. And further, how as children, we're looking all the time to our parents and how they relate to try and find our place in that spectrum, often far too narrow, of what is gender. And sometimes that's a brutal and brutalizing experience. Carlos, what an honor and a privilege to have you with us. And thank you for trusting us in that extraordinary way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cindy, can I turn to you? I don't know, what time is it where you are? Are you in some unconscionable pre or post coffee time zone? And can you remember, not so much your first coffee, but the first time gender came to you as something to be dealt with? Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. And thank you, Kate, and thank you to MenEngage and to everyone here. It's an honor to be here. And although Kate has definitely oversold the plenary, we will do our best to live up to it and look forward to engaging with you all. When I think about what comes to mind for me in terms of my first memory or awareness of gender, I am an only child. And so I didn't have siblings. I didn't have that differencing among siblings, but I was very used then to doing things by myself, and I could do them, and there weren't limits to that. And I remember an instance, I don't know exactly how old I was, a kid. We went camping with other families. Outdoors, a lake, we're in a forest, we're gathering wood for the fire that we're going to build. I gathered, I was responsible for loading the wood box at home, but all of a sudden in this environment with other kids around and a boy, it was like, oh, let the boy carry the wood. Like, no, I can carry the wood. I know how to do this. And so it was that message. That's the first instance that sticks out in my mind. But even, thinking later as I was a bit older and talking to my grandmother about what I wanted to do, and granted at the time, I don't think it was a good idea at the time. I wanted to go into the foreign service, and her saying, "Oh, but you're a nice girl. That's not a job for nice girls." Like, and so those sort of messages are what come to mind for me.
Thank you so much, Cindy. It's very powerful, those images, actually, both in relationship to your grandmother and the simple daily task carrying wood. Gender is almost it is a form of programming. If we were some form of computer, it's software that gets tipped into our operating systems at almost every turn. And somehow, if we are to disturb that software, because it's not an equal set of messaging, it's not a humanizing set of messaging, it's so fixed and imprisoning, actually. If we're to disturb it, we somehow have to reprogram. And that's a very powerful set of images. And Cindy, thanks a bunch, seriously. All right. Sharanya, can you remember the first time this thing called gender stuck its nose in your way? And great to have you with us, Sharanya. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. It's such a privilege and so exciting to be here. It's really interesting to me because I'm so interested, in the other answers and how early it started. It's so early. And for me, it's really interesting because I went to a co-ed school. So until we were about 8, everything seemed, fairly the same. And then I remember this incident very clearly. We had, this sort of, I can't remember the details, but somebody who came in to talk to us about different careers we may want to do and what do you want to be when you grow up. And I remember, because I grew up in Sri Lanka during the war and the war was at its height at the time, I wanted to be a conflict reporter for BBC. Like that, I was very clear at 8 years old. This is exactly what I was going to be. And I said this, because I was very clear on it. And I remember that, she was a lady. She looked at me and she said, "Oh no, sweetie, but what about when you have children?" And I remember kind of being like, "What? I'm 8." And I was like, "So?" And then she went, she went on this whole thing. And I was like, well, there were a bunch of boys who said they wanted to be a pilot. And nobody said anything about, oh, you'll have to travel and it's dangerous. And I was like, so is being a pilot. And I remember I talked back because that's what I did. And my teacher, one of my teachers, she was Tamil, and there weren't very many Tamil children. I'm ethnically Tamil. And she muttered at me and she used a very specific word. She said, it's in Tamil, it's bakkam, and it really, what it means is shame. And it's often used on young girls to sort of be like, don't you have any shame? But it's a very gendered word almost. And she kind of hissed at me, don't you have any shame? You're talking back, behave. And I was thinking, the boys have been yelling this whole time. They haven't even been paying attention to this session. Like, shouldn't we be more pleased? I know what I want to do. But that incident really, in absolute detail stands out at me because I suddenly realized that it wasn't the same. And somehow my answer elicited this whole response and this whole, kind of domino effect, which none of the boys' answers, and of course, most of the girls wanted to be a princess. So of course, I was the problem creator, as always, and that has continued in my life. But it was really interesting to me, that moment, and suddenly realizing things can be different to what I say.
Sharanya, thank you so much. I think it's beautiful how your story, when put alongside Cindy's, when put alongside Carlos's, when put alongside Sanam's, put alongside Carme's, and we're about to hear from Nyaradzayi, we start to see that there is something universal here that is not ideological. The universality is not an invention, if you like, but it's a lived reality that somehow, in all our diversity, still this idea of what's a good girl and what's a bad girl, and what you should and shouldn't do, and what you should and shouldn't wear, and what does a boy look like, and what does a girl do? These things have been shaped, narrated, imposed, rewarded, and unrewarded, punished even, since we were very little. I feel so much for our children, actually, for the children within us and the children that we were. And thank goodness, Sharanya, and all the rest of you, you've never learned to be good. We've deeply appreciative. You've been talking back and been ill-behaved ever since, and we love you, love you, love you for it. Thank you for your courage. It's fantastic. Nyaradzayi, my dear friend, can you remember? I mean, what are you thinking as you listen to these stories? And does it align, or is it different from? Yeah, tell us. And so gorgeous to have you.
I can connect the dots immediately. I'm Nyaradzayi. I am sitting over 100 kilometers out of the capital city. My internet keeps on dropping. This is an issue of class and access and gender. So you may lose me any minute, and I keep on coming back. My earliest moment was I was sent back from school because my parents had not managed to pay school fees, and I was in the 3rd grade. And my mother started shouting at my father, and it was unheard of. My mother was a grandmother when I was born, and I'm her 14th pregnancy. So it seems me being sent back to school was a trigger for her to say certain things to my father, which she'd always wanted to say. So she said, I was tired of getting pregnant. After all, I did not choose you. Your parents and my parents made the decision for us to marry. And she was now an old woman who has finally found her voice to talk about the injustice of her lifetime, that she was married to a man she never chose and never loved. And she was saying it in front of me, and my father was dumbfounded. My father was just stood there frozen.
Dear friends, we may have lost Nyaradzayi for exactly the reasons she described early on. I hope you were able to hear the deep challenge of her story. Nyaradzayi, we lost you a little bit. We lost you just a little bit. Do you want to? But you're back.
Yes. When she sat with me the following day, she said, I love you, but you have to find your voice. And I found mine very late in life. When I'm an old woman, you must find your voice and speak out when injustice happens. Thank you.
Nyaradzayi, so many people all over the world have benefited from you finding your voice, and we're enormously privileged to have you with us. All of us, I think, can identify with the generosity of those stories that we've just had the privilege of hearing. And I know it triggered in me many memories of being programmed into gender, not just encouraged in a single direction, but prevented and then punished for other directions. We've heard issues of cruelty, we've heard issues of encouragement, we've heard daring and constructive disobedience. And these things are inspiring, and we can see in our wonderful panelists exactly where their strength and courage is laid down. But coming from that micro intimate space where we were all built and where we learned to resist and to speak out and hopefully find our voices, I wonder if we could ask now a question at the other end of the intellectual spectrum, and bringing us into the world today now. Dear panelists, this is such a tough time for so many people, for people of all identities, but some identities in particular. And intersectionality highlights how the stratification of human beings is working to bring cruel consequence for people of particular settings, in particular of particular identities, in particular settings. I wonder if I could invite you to say, you know, of the world today, which trends globally, regionally, nationally, locally trouble you the most? Which things do you think really are the greatest impediments and threats to the advance of gender equality and which things inspire you the most. So we're in global regional trends looking for a sense of priority about where we need to put pressure, but also a sense of where we have leverage and what we can be optimistic about. I wonder if I can go to Carme first. Carme, as Regional Director of JASS Mesoamérica, I wonder what you see as both the gravest threat, but the most inspirational opportunity for us for gender equality. And I thank you again.
Ok, gracias, Kate. Hablo en español también porque me es más fácil. Bueno, los retos. Yo creo que una de las cosas que nos preocupa es el retroceso que hay en este momento de lo que se llama el fundamentalismo antigénero. Lastimosamente es algo que vuelve a cuestionar eso que hace, yo soy un poquito mayor, es decir, tengo ya más de 60 años, que esos roles de género que ahorita explicamos todas aquí, que nos cuestionaba, hoy en día vuelve a estar en la agenda. Es decir, nos están cuestionando estos roles como mujeres. Me preocupa mucho, tiene mucha fuerza y es un movimiento global. Es un movimiento global que cuestiona nuestros roles como madres, cuestiona nuestro derecho a decidir. Es decir, la discriminación de género vuelve a estar fuerte. Es decir, nunca se ha ido, seguimos luchando contra esa discriminación de género. Que uno de los impactos más claros es la violencia. Es decir, creo que la violencia contra las mujeres nos preocupa, tiene variantes, si la ves en Asia, si la ves en África, en Latinoamérica, en Europa, en Estados Unidos. Pero ese abuso del poder de los hombres hacia nosotras las mujeres. Eso nos preocupa, nos preocupa. Sin embargo, me inspira el que el movimiento feminista, los movimientos feministas diversos con la interseccionalidad, con los derechos de las mujeres indígenas, las jóvenes, mujeres LGBTIQ, etcétera, es decir, toda la diversidad, seguimos estando ahí. Seguimos estando, somos fuertes, con tensiones. No digo que no haya tensiones dentro de los movimientos feministas. Por ejemplo, uno que en Latinoamérica, en este momento, en Mesoamérica, tensiona mucho es la respuesta ante la violencia contra las mujeres y las denuncias o acusaciones a los hombres agresores, que creo que quiero entrar un poquito en ese tema cuando hablemos de perspectivas para MenEngage, ¿no? Creo que eso es decir, tenemos ese gran reto, hay un retroceso mundial de la ideología antigénero, creo que el movimiento feminista, los movimientos feministas somos fuertes, diversos, pero es esa combinación, porque un elemento que creo que nos golpea mucho a todas es esa violencia. Y esa violencia que además no es solo la palabra violencia, violencia en redes, violencia física o sexual, sino la muerte, los asesinatos de mujeres. Y eso ha generado mucha rabia, mucha indignación en nuestros movimientos. Y creo que es un tema que tenemos que trabajar, sobre todo en México, en Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua. Entonces, creo que juntas podemos hacer muchas cosas. Y quería terminar con un comentario, escuchando a las anteriores panelistas. Me encanta estar con todas ustedes, con la diversidad de mujeres, experiencias y con Carlos. Hay una frase que en el movimiento feminista en Cataluña, porque yo soy originaria de Cataluña, pero hace 30 años que estoy en Nicaragua, soy una ni-catalana, decíamos, las mujeres malas las mujeres buenas van al cielo, las mujeres malas vamos a todas partes. Entonces, yo me considero que soy de esas mujeres malas porque podemos ir a todas partes, ¿no? Entonces, quisiera cerrar en ese sentido de la fuerza. Yo estoy aquí por otras mujeres. Si no llega a ser por eso, yo no estaría aquí. Gracias. Sé que creo que me quedan 14 segundos, pero bueno, un gusto estar aquí y aportar en la medida que podamos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. It's never been so good to be so bad. And you've moved us and reminded us that actually, you know, what gender equality and the striving for it asks us to be is non-conformist, to be outside the boxes, outside the common paths. And that takes courage. Sanam, when you think about it, Sanam, I'm imagining that as a youth activist, somebody deeply dedicated to women's rights, you must have been thinking about how we can shape this world for you as a generation of leaders that inherits quite a mess from old people, of which I am a card-carrying member. Sanam, when you think about these global trends that worry you a lot and the ones that inspire you, what comes to your mind?
Well, first of all, Kate, you are definitely not one of the old people that I resent. I remember reading the work that you did when you were still with the High Commission on Human Rights and being like, oh, I want to do that.
I love you.
But I must say that we're at this point where things do look really, really bleak. It's very difficult to have hope when you have this, even before coronavirus really shut things down and put our communities in this moment of desperation. We were already seeing multiple crises and so much inequality, and really so many snaps for everything that Carme has said. There's, for me, I have similar fears of fundamentalism, and linked to that nationalism, which I think is just the many tentacles of patriarchy, the many hydra heads of patriarchy expressing itself. There is a resonance definitely with my generation, with the millennials, as well as Generation Z, where we're seeing a lot of things that we didn't expect to come back. We thought that it was history, practices, traditions that we thought were closed in the history books. Like, oh, we used to burn witches. No, that's still true in parts of the world. We used to deny education to women and make them stay at home. No, that's still true in many parts of the world. And the fact that we are at this point where the world population is just so much larger, the wealth is so much greater, the inequality is so much greater, and there's so many entry points for action on many of these things, but we're stuck on old systems, on old hierarchies, on old dimensions of power that we can't seem to overturn. And that's what's very frightening, that we can't seem to let go of traditions in many ways. And as I said, nationalism in relation to the world order today really worries me, because so much of what's going wrong in terms of militarism, in terms of these conflicts and so-called tradition, is rooted in this idea of a system and a tradition and a culture that is pure and perfect. And I'll just drop a sort of thought first. One of the things that I'm doing with the Feminist COVID Response Collective, where we're having a feminist sci-fi book club, because we're sort of examining feminist utopias and imaginings of feminist futures, because we really want to break away from the brainwashing that I think we recognized in our first round of earliest memories of gender. We've been trained so long that it's really important to break away and look at those ideas of feminist utopias and what the world might look like without patriarchy and without all of these structures of power. And one of those sessions, we discussed, of course, Ursula Le Guin, and particularly the book we discussed was The Left Hand of Darkness. And this quote struck me so much, is the love of your country the hate of your uncountry? And sometimes you can switch that around and apply it, that is the love of this gender binary the hate of the other. Like, it's so many layers and divisions that we've falsely created. And when it comes to nationalism, we're just choosing to create hate. And I guess the state of that right now is what worries me. But what does give me hope is the fact that there have been many leaders and many thinkers who have tried to imagine our way out of it. There have been movements fighting to realize a path out of it. And I think, the the part that gives us the most hope right now is the fact that we're part of that organizing and part of those movements, trying to imagine our way and build a path out.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, Sanam. I think we're all struck by the intersectionality of your perspective and Carme's, because you have together put at the center of our conversation the problem of ideology and fundamentalists in the construction of gender binaries. But you've also reminded us that there are many contagions, not just COVID, and the contagion of violence that has gripped, in particular, across Latin America at community levels. Carme is reminding us. And behind that, I think, challenging us to think about our looking to police and to court systems to provide a justice framing around such as GBV. But Sanam, you very powerfully recalled that we are in the hope constructing business. We're in the hope making business. And from that very powerful and provocative idea that we make our own hope, I'd love to go to Nyaradzayi. Nyaradzayi, I'm going to come to you because I know your internet is really working against you, finding it easy to be with us. But whilst it's stable, can I ask you, what do you see as the major trends? And I wondered if you could help us. How do we think about the fundamentalisms that we know are seizing these constructs of male, female, non-binary gender identities, and in particular this fundamentalist Christianity that seems to be so hell-bent on regression? We'd love to hear from you, Nyaradzayi. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. I'll make 4 quick points. We have a crisis of good men who do nothing because they embed their rhetoric in goodness, and at the same time they are defending patriarchy. It's much easier to do with men who upfront, or people who upfront express patriarchal attitudes, perspective, positions, than to deal with good men who cannot call out violence when it happens, who may actually in their private lives be perpetuating abuse. That's the first crisis that we have. We have too many good men in the world who are doing nothing to dismantle patriarchy, and yet who profess to be doing great stuff. Secondly, the second crisis is the crisis of men and women, but mostly men in positions of responsibility who are irresponsible and who aren't carrying their responsibility to be transformative. We have majority of men as parliamentarians, majority of religious leaders, majority of headmasters, majority of doctors. So when we ask where are the men, I said the men are there. They're in positions of decisions. They're simply not making decisions. So that's a crisis that we have, is we have people in decision making who are not making decisions that advance gender equality, human rights, and dignity. And we continue to say involve, but for me, it's not about involving men or including. It's about everybody who is in a position of responsibility, authority, power, to act responsibly and use their power and authority responsibly and share the power and transform the issues of controlled resources. The third crisis that we have is the crisis of us as women who have internalized patriarchy, and we unconsciously defend patriarchy. So we are busy wanting to be included and not sufficiently wanting to be transformed, to be part of the transformation. We work from the premise of inclusion, and we always look for the external savior, whether that savior is government, is our fathers, it's our husbands, it's our sons. But it's a number of women who need to be liberated to know that transformation is also internal, because those trends and that thinking is what is reinforcing conservatism. It's what is buttressing patriarchy. But we also have hope. And for me, that hope lies around how we are daring to be transformative in co-creating a new world, a new language, a new thinking. We are co-creating here in this space within MenEngage, thinking that when it comes to sexual rights, sexual violence, sexual abuse, let's challenge language. What is called child marriage is not a marriage. A child cannot marry. Let's call it what it is. It is rape, defilement, sexual exploitation, child labor, trafficking. Let's name it. But we use language which reinforces and sustains an abuse. We talk of defilement. When a little girl is raped, you say she's defiled, as if she's a flower that has lost its beauty. She is raped, she's not defiled. We talk about having sex with a minor, a crime called having sex with a minor. That's rape. So we must deconstruct all the language within our criminal law statutes, within our human rights work, so that we name abuse as it is, because that co-creation of language is the transformative agenda that dismantles patriarchy, that sets new indicators for the SDGs, that sets new thinking within the treaty bodies. As long as we are measuring indicators by marriage, by defilement, by having sex with a minor, we are not talking about rape that is happening to women and have long-term impact. My last comment is we need to have, and we are having the power to reclaim, re-own, and redefine faith and culture. As long as we work on the margins of tinkering with patriarchy and do not have the courage to say, I am an African woman whose identity and culture is part of me, and I reclaim that as part of my Ubuntu, and I reject any abuse of my culture, any abuse of my religion to undermine human rights and women's rights. We must have the courage to work with feminist theologians, to work with feminist cultural gender experts, because it's sisters and brothers who are working from the womb of patriarchy. As long as we tinker in the margins and are not part of the transformative agenda, we'll continue to be measuring the instrumentalistic indicators without being transformative to the fundamental of patriarchy. And this is where the work is exciting, where we have the intersectionality in Africa on the work on ending child marriage. Because what we have is we see a lot of policymakers pushing for a protection agenda, protecting women, protecting children. It's important, but it's not sufficient, because it's about controlling sexuality. And we have women who are talking about autonomy, about voice, about agency, because they want to be part of the decision making. And we have young people who are also talking about inclusion and their own agency. So that intersectionality of policymakers, predominantly men, of women's movement, and the young people and the youth movement and the child rights movement, if we can reclaim and reframe together a transformative agenda around a single issue like child marriage, we reclaim the agenda substantively. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you so much, Nyaradzayi. I can see how much everybody online is appreciating the depth of challenge in our conversation. And Carlos, I'm wondering, as Vice President of Accessibility, Diversity, Inclusion for Interpride, when you listen to these bad women talking about good men who aren't doing anything in the face of this, I mean, how, what's your sense of the gravest threat? I mean, how does it present to you on a global or regional level? And indeed, where do you take strength from, dear Carlos? What inspires you, and what do you think we should all be inspired by? Thank you very much.
Merci Kate. La première structure pour moi, parce qu'avant qu'on ne parle de structure d'organisation communautaire ou d'organisation internationale, ou même des institutions qui travaillent sur les enjeux du féminisme, je crois que la première structure, c'est notre famille. Parce que c'est au sein de ma famille que j'ai commencé tout petit à réfléchir sur la notion de la violence. La violence était présente sous toutes ses formes. La violence était silencieuse, la violence était matérielle, la violence était omniprésente. Elle occupait vraiment toute la place à la maison. Mon père incarnait vraiment la figure emblématique de la violence. Et comme Nyara le disait tout à l'heure, je pense que je parle de mon père ici, pas parce que je n'ai pas aimé mon père, j'ai profondément aimé mon père, j'aime mon père encore, mais il faut utiliser, le temps est venu pour nous d'utiliser le langage qu'il faut si nous voulons déconstruire, si nous voulons poser les mécanismes qui vont nous permettre de pouvoir éduquer les hommes et les garçons et les femmes aussi sur ce qu'est le féminisme, ce qu'est les impacts de la violence. Donc, mon père incarnait cette figure emblématique de la violence à la maison. Avant même que je commence à savoir, à apprendre ce que c'est que le féminisme, il y avait tous les enjeux du féminisme ou les facteurs qui favorisent en fait l'émergence d'un mouvement féministe. Tous ces facteurs-là étaient présents au sein de ma famille, avec toutes mes sœurs qui étaient là, avec ma mère et tout ça qui vivait la violence, et avec moi aussi qui vivait cette violence-là dans mon petit coin, en silence, en train de réfléchir sur mon orientation sexuelle, sur mon identité de genre, mais en même temps essayer de comprendre pourquoi cet homme qui nous dit qu'il nous aime tant, mais en même temps est celui-là qui nous sert toutes les formes de violence dans cette famille. Donc là, avant de structurer les choses en dehors de nos familles, notre famille constitue en fait la première structure de cette violence-là. Elle constitue en fait le premier noyau où les différents enjeux autour de l'émergence de féminisme prennent forme. Mais évidemment, nous ne pouvons pas prendre conscience de cela jusqu'à ce que nous ayons une certaine maturité, que nous soyons exposés à nos expériences aussi de la vie. Dans mon cas, par exemple, il a fallu que je sorte de ce noyau familial. Il y avait un choix à faire entre rester silencieux, me laisser mourir dans le silence ou couper carrément les ponts avec ma famille ou ce qui constitue le noyau de la violence et être vocal et parler, décider d'être activiste en fait pour changer la trajectoire du courant de ma vie qui était tout à fait négatif, basé sur cette violence-là. Et donc, c'est beaucoup plus tard que j'ai commencé à découvrir les terminologies de féminisme, essayer de comprendre c'était quoi le mouvement du féminisme. Et à l'époque, quand j'avais découvert le mouvement du féminisme, on ne parlait pas encore, il n'y avait pas encore l'utilisation du mot intersectionnalité. Mais pour revenir une fois encore à mon noyau familial, les différentes expériences que que mes sœurs et moi avons vécues dans cette famille-là, décrivaient déjà l'aspect intersectionnel du mouvement féministe. Parce que quand on prend les enjeux qui entourent les droits des femmes, quand on parle ne serait-ce que de la violence qui est faite aux femmes, on ne peut pas voir ça sur un seul angle. Sur le tableau, il y a plusieurs angles qui nous permettent de pouvoir mieux comprendre ces enjeux-là. Mais ça a pris du temps avant de pouvoir comprendre ces enjeux parce qu'effectivement, la préoccupation des premières féministes qui ont lancé le mouvement, c'était d'obtenir les droits pour les femmes, peu importe la race, peu importe les origines, peu importe les croyances de ces femmes-là. Ça, c'est une chose. L'autre aspect aussi qui nous permet de parler d'intersectionnalité en tant qu'homme queer, c'est comment ce débat-là est mené au sein du mouvement LGBTQ. Comment des années plus tôt, par exemple, un organe comme les Nations Unies, en mettant en place cet organe-là d'orientation sexuelle et d'expression de genre et des caractéristiques sexuelles, a voulu structurer cette conversation de sorte que le débat autour du féminisme ne prenne pas seulement en compte la femme hétérosexuelle, mais qu'elle inclut aussi la femme lesbienne, la femme transgenre, qu'elle essaie de comprendre quels sont les mécanismes ou les dynamiques qui se forment quand il arrive d'avoir la conversation, d'orienter la conversation dans une direction de non-binarité, dans une direction de non-conformisme. Et je crois que c'est en ce moment-là que le débat devient très intéressant parce que ça nous présente un tableau de féminisme assez diversifié, assez inclusif, mais même avec l'inclusivité, on ne devait pas le prendre pour acquis. Il faut aussi que les personnes qui font partie des différentes composantes de ce mouvement féminisme-là puissent dire, ben, écoutez, je suis aussi présente dans la salle, je suis d'une orientation et d'une identité de genre différente, et donc, quand on parle d'intersectionnalité dans le mouvement féministe, il faudrait qu'on regarde ces aspects-là. Et de façon générale, je pense que c'est ce qui favorise aujourd'hui la conversation par rapport au patriarcat dans le mouvement LGBT. Il faut le dire, les personnes LGBT n'ont pas un modèle différent de ce que le monde hétérosexuel a. Nous naissons dans une société hétérosexuelle. Nous n'apprenons pas autre chose que cette violence qui est perpétrée dans les communautés, les sociétés hétérosexuelles. Et c'est la même chose que nous continuons, que nous reproduisons au sein des mouvements LGBTQ+. Donc, quand les gens s'étonnent de voir que des personnes qui ont subi la violence ou des personnes qui ont été opprimées ou ostracisées reproduisent cette violence-là, je pense que la science l'a décrit aussi, que c'est très facile pour des personnes qui subissent la violence de pouvoir reproduire cette même violence sur d'autres personnes qui sont beaucoup plus vulnérables qu'elles. Et c'est ce que nous vivons au sein des communautés LGBT. Et donc, je pense que nous sommes arriver à une étape de la construction des mouvements féministes où tous ces enjeux-là, toute cette diversité nous permet de mieux comprendre comment de façon intersectionnelle nous pouvons adresser ces enjeux-là et ne pas rester cantonnés sur un seul aspect des mouvements féministes. Et Kimberly Crenshaw l'a dit.
Merci.
Oui.
Merci, Carlos. What I think you're really challenging us to understand is, first of all, change is possible. People can be transformed with given half a chance around new concepts and tools and space to speak, to find their voice, rather than either be forced to join a louder cluster of voices where they don't belong or to be silenced, but given the right concepts that help them tell their stories, people can change and people can grow. I mean, this is a beautiful, beautiful thing to inspire us, but we're also very challenged by what you said, I think, to just because we say we believe in human rights and are ourselves ideologically committed to human rights doesn't mean that we behave in those ways. It doesn't mean that we have necessarily cleansed ourselves of that internalized hate and prejudice. Cindy, I've been thinking about bringing your voice in on this question of global trends from AWID's standpoint, and as the co-executive director of AWID in the USA. I wonder how it looks from your standpoint. We're so blessed to have you join us post that very well overexposed election. We're delighted that President Trump has gone to Resident Trump, and we're thrilled to have you here on that other side. But how is that world looking from your standpoint and the trends, and how on earth do you keep going? What inspires you? Cindy, it's fantastic to have you with us.
Sure, thanks so much. And I mean, I will echo, I will try not to repeat too much of what many of the other panelists have spoken to. So AWID is a global feminist membership organization. We have members all around the world. As you say, I am from the US, so I will strike a more positive note today than I might have a week ago. I would focus on two trends that are the trends that AWID is putting particular attention on. One, the other speakers have already spoken to quite a bit in terms of the dominance of fascist and fundamentalist agendas across our societies. And what I'd like to pull out is we're talking about how these agendas and actors occupy religious power, political power and economic power. They are not just sideline cultural actors. They are at the heart of our institutions. And it's also not a phenomenon that's restricted to a particular religion or a particular country or region. I mean, we have a lot of the research and evidence that shows that it is cross-region, cross-religion phenomenon. I think that others have mentioned that these are actors that really target women, girls, people who are non-conforming in their gender identity or expression or sexual orientation. They target migrants, people of color, and any community that they can label as other, in order to defend what they understand as their religion, culture, or tradition. And so they advance this myth, either that we have a homogenous nation, and we certainly hear that in Trump, make America great again, return to what we were, which is a lie of what we ever were, or claims to kind of uphold some kind of ethnic or racial superiority or purity. And it's what we need to pay close attention to is that these movements, although many of them seem like they should, that they wouldn't find common cause, they are actually quite well coordinated and they're incredibly well resourced. They're having very big impacts. So across Europe and the United States, fundamentalist anti-rights actors who are more focused on gender and sexuality are forging links with those that are focused on nationalism and anti-immigration. We've heard a lot of stories about how US-based evangelicals are funding and organizing along with evangelicals in Africa. In late 2019, the World Conference of Families was held in Ghana, and we had a look at the huge impact that the organizing of US evangelicals and money had in influencing political agendas against comprehensive sex education, advancing homophobia. So at the same time, these are actors that are having a huge impact in both international and in regional human rights systems and spaces. They're undermining the universality of rights, which is that foundational principle that human rights belong to everyone, no matter who we are, without any exception. You know, I think Carme alluded to this rise of anti-rights actors that talk about gender ideology. And they use that both to defend their own positions and to attack any progressive initiative, not just about sexuality and gender orientation or identity, but also about any social justice agenda or environmental issues. So I would call on all of us as feminists, as groups concerned about gender equality, to unite much more in the same ways that these forces against us are united, and be prepared to really recognize some of the labels that they use. When we hear protection of the family, that's a signal that is going to be undermining it, trying to reinforce a particular understanding of traditional roles and norms. When we hear traditional values, what that means. The one other trend that I would want to just mention is the impact of the dominant economic model that we're in on gender inequality and our inability to enjoy our basic human rights. So we know there is a huge influence of international financial markets and institutions in our economies. Often, the statistics, I think, vary quite a lot, but what I will cite here is that not only does 1% of the population own as much wealth as the rest of the world combined, so let's hold that. Corporations, of the top 100 economic revenue collectors, they are 71. That means 29 would be states, 71 of the largest economic revenue collectors are corporations. So there's huge degrees of corporate power. So much of our advocacy is focused on states, and yet many of our states are not able to uphold our economic rights, respond to citizens' demands, because they're beholden to very powerful corporate interests. So And at the same time, that's very much embedded. We haven't talked a lot about climate, but this is also clearly a model that's based on prioritizing profit at the expense of workers, people, and the environment, and exploiting all of those. And yet, I want to strike my hopeful note. So Sanam was talking about feminist futures, and within AWID in the last few years, one of the things that we've been prioritizing is how we bring to the center the feminist realities and the propositions that we have. Because yes, we all know the world is quite difficult. And in most of our conversations, we spend a lot of time analyzing the problems. We don't often enough spend time talking about the solutions. And Sanam referenced this as well. The critical importance of our capacity to imagine a different world. And so we have been convening, we got hundreds of responses from different groups all over the world to share their experiences of feminist realities. That is what inspires me and gives me hope. Feminist movements have throughout history resisted racism, coloniality, patriarchy. That long trajectory has given us many practices of self-determination, of mutual aid, of reciprocity that we can build on. So I'm inspired by seeing the International Domestic Workers Federation convert their offices that were vacant in COVID-19 to shelters for workers. I'm inspired by the thousands of women and men around the world who are forming economic cooperatives, who are pursuing, who are collecting and saving seeds, who are taking care of kind of their own community economies and resisting land grabbing. There are thousands of experiences around the world, and we want to be able to lift these up and build on them.
Cindy, thank you. And through you, we just celebrate the work, the global work of AWID that you co-lead. And thank you for connecting us to people's movements around the world, from Belarus to Chile, from Iraq to the streets of Hong Kong. There are counterbalance images of people coming together, exactly as you said, about joining together and joining across movements to stand up and resist this tide of populist regression that somehow is obsessed with issues of gender, intriguingly. Sharanya, when you think about these things that our gorgeous panelists have been describing and analysing for us with such depth and in such moving ways, what comes to your mind? What does it trigger for you in terms of the big global trends or the regional trends that we've got to get on with? And where do you take hope and courage from?
Thank you so much, Kate. Yeah, I mean, it's been really fascinating to listen also, and, kind of the privilege of going last, because then you don't get to repeat what anyone else has said. But something that really truly comes to my mind, especially as we're talking about intersectional feminist movements and we're talking about, how we move forward in a feminist future. Two things that really come to my mind that I have seen manifested great deal at the regional and national level, and I'm beginning, as I move my work into the global space, to see manifest in the global space. And that really stands out for me. Well, three things. One is I want to tie to what Cindy said, and, something you brought up with the US election is really seeing the playing out of toxic masculinity in political power and leadership. When the entire narrative, and we see this so much in South Asia, this idea of a strong man, increased militarization. In Sri Lanka, in a recent election that we had, a lot of the criticism of the government, who then, was lost power, was that they were implications that they were queer, and therefore, they couldn't provide the masculine leadership the country needs. And also that idea of you're protecting your motherland, you're protecting your mother, you're protecting these women, and this very, toxic masculinity narrative that's coming up in political power and leadership, I think is something really concerning, and really raises so many red flags and so many thoughts for me. The second thing that I wanted to bring up was, I've seen this so much, and it really, is concerning to see, is this reiteration that when you talk about violence against women and girls, you are now constantly met with the sort of argument that men and boys face harassment and violence too. And it's the two that's tacked on, right? And it turns the space into a competitive one. It undermines work that feminists and violence against women activists have done for decades to get to where we are now. It's not that the world woke up today and suddenly, decided. It's not that Sri Lanka woke up in 2006 and said, let's pass the Domestic Violence Act. It's not any of those things, right? It's decades and decades of fighting and pushing and working that got us to this point. And now there is this suggestion, and often without any evidence, that you're amplifying violence against women and girls at the cost of acknowledging or addressing violence that happens to men. And somehow this is space that's being taken away, and that we are replacing one idea of power, which is interesting also because obviously the patriarchy can only imagine a system in which one kind of power is replaced with another, and they can't possibly imagine a different idea. And the third thing that I want to talk about in terms of concerns was I've seen this manifest is in a rush to engage men and boys in this work, you've seen programs take attention or funding away from work that is directly responding to the needs and views of female survivors of violence, and the need and the importance of centering women and girls in GBV theory and programs. So for example, with COVID-19, we're seeing the depth of inequality. We're seeing, really how much it has amplified inequality in the home, inequality in the kinds of jobs women do. They're much more likely to lose their jobs because they're often in unprotected, casual work with no protections. In South Asia, we're seeing our migrant workers who often provide the largest amount of foreign remittance to our countries and sustain our economies, unable to even get back home and are stuck, there are Sri Lankan women stuck in Jordan who the government doesn't care about them. And the Jordanian government has kind of been like, we wash our hands off you, right? But still, you're hearing this narrative of COVID being the great equalizer. COVID doesn't discriminate. And there are no targeted programs and policies as a result looking at these inequalities that are impacting women and girls. So it's absolutely imperative, and I hope we can talk about this a bit more, that we have to engage women and boys. I think there's no question on that. But how do we do that in a way that's meaningful and effective, and not in a way that rushes to it and ends up taking attention and funding away from work that's already so contested and already so difficult to do, and already you're clinging on to it by the very edge of your fingernails, and now suddenly this narrative comes in and completely upends that. But to end on a more hopeful note, what inspires me is people and organizations that are pushing back against the narrative, that are imagining, not just imagining a feminist future or a feminist world, but actually building it, actually doing that, whether it's within the organizations they are creating, whether it's organizations like COFEM or FRIDA or AWID who question it within their own staff, who question it within how they even do things internally, not just externally. People speaking up against fascist regimes, against huge human rights violations. I think we don't think about this enough. There are activists doing work that we're simply speaking up, simply posting a tweet or a Facebook status is a threat. It's a threat to their lives. It's a threat to their existence. And I think people who just push back and wake up each day and feel like they can keep fighting and feel like there's a reason to keep fighting and keep resisting and are not going back down, no matter how bleak it seems, I draw so much inspiration from that. And for me, as long as there's resistance, there is hope.
Thank you so much, Sharanya. I think you've taken us to the heart of the project, building on the very important contributions we've heard, in that you have said that, look, there's an urgency here. The degree of suffering to which people are subjected to because of these big meta trends that we've been describing, the sort of pandemic of prejudice, the contagion of contempt, not just of COVID, that is exemplified in the intersectionality between white supremacy, religious extremists, and greed, unconscionable greed people of the kind that Cindy powerfully described. I mean, these are really huge things if we're to rescue both people and planet. They're huge things for us to overcome. So gorgeous panelists. We've got some questions, but I wanted to put one more issue to you, and then we'll start to have this conversation with our lovely participants who make this all worthwhile. And that is, given your analysis of the global trends, come on, where does engagement with men and boys fit in? Is it a distraction? Is it the right framing, or is it just a waste of time? And when you think about it, because Sharanya reminded us, and in fact, at moments in our struggle, it's almost become the Olympic Games of victimhood. Oh, you know, we're struggling too, and you say it's difficult for women to speak about sexual violence. It's so much more difficult for men. I mean, people, really, dudes, it's not a competition. But the reality is that we haven't yet found the storyline, the narrative to expand the space for men and boys to engage constructively. And in fact, somebody asked us a question from the floor, well, is there any hope for men? Is there anything good about masculinity? So would someone, who'd like to jump in first for our sort of next round of challenge? What is the point? Dudes, why would you bother? Where does men and boys stuff fit in, and why does it matter to you? Why do you think it's important? Or would you just let it go and find another construction? First one, ready to go? Cindy, please, gorgeous. Go, Cindy, go, 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 go.
All right, I got to give it a go.
Yeah, right. Brilliant.
And let's not boil it down to, you know, men and women, and beyond questioning the gender binary, like Black, white, people of color, people with disabilities, and people who don't identify as having disabilities, like with intergenerational differences, right? We all need to be able to understand how we are differentially impacted by the systems of oppression that we face. And if we're willing, we then need to work together to upend those systems. So I appreciate, I think this question is trying to get at the difficulty that we do have. There's a level of skepticism. There's an eye roll, like, oh, what are these men doing rolling in here? And yet, you know, of course, we are all about building the alliances that we need. I think shifting masculinities and dominant notions of masculinities is critical in the same way I think shifting our understanding of whiteness and how white privilege is enacted in society is also critical. Now, what I wanted to share a little bit some of AWID's own reflections in terms of how we understand and want to apply feminism in our work. So for us, what does that mean? It means putting those that experience the oppressions at the center, not because they're victims, but because they're the experts in the solutions and putting those solutions into practice. It's multidimensional and it's intersectional. So it's not just, oh, we want to do whatever benefits women. We want to ask who's benefiting, who's left out, how are they differently impacted? How is this questioning the status quo? And we want to recognize that we're not alone. So feminists, wherever we are, have to be in other movements fighting injustice. Are we in climate movements? Are we in labor movements? So that we're pursuing this broader agenda. And I wanted to end and just share back, my colleague Srilata Batliwala attended the last MenEngage Symposium for AWID. And when she was reflecting back on that, she felt that one of the most important achievements in the space was, I'm going to quote her here, the virtually unanimous agreement that the root cause of gender injustice, and hence the shared political agenda of those present, was the dismantling of patriarchy. So patriarchy as the primary oppressive power structure, not only because of what it does to women and other subordinate genders, and its dehumanizing effects on men, but also because it's the engine that fuels exploitative economic models, environmentally destructive development, and all forms of war, conflict, and violence. So absolutely, we have to target behavior change, we have to support transformation of masculinities, and we need to connect the individual engagement with the systemic change we're fighting for.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cindy. And I want to really give a fantastic shout out to our online supporters in Rwanda who are sending through fantastic questions. David, Albert, dudes, thank you so much for challenging us to think about how men can contribute, including LGBTQI. So, gorgeous panelists, come on, what is the point of engagement with men and boys? Who's going next? Carme, did you want to go next?
Yeah.
Sorry, Nyaradzayi. We're going to Carme first.
No. Use Naya because she has a connection. She has connection. Go ahead.
All right, Carme, great. Nyaradzayi, then Carme, then Carlos. Woohoo!
So, risking to be thrown out by those who invited me and the symposium is MenEngage. I'm like, is it MenEngage? I need men to redistribute. I want men to redistribute power, to redistribute resources, to redistribute love and not violence. I want to go beyond engaging to relating. I'm looking for a concept which enables the power, the collective power of men to be more transformative than just to be instrumentalistic. So that's what I'm looking for. And secondly, in my life, when I am relating, advocating, connecting with various categories of men, I never think about them as men. I think about the institutionalized authority around them. Whether I'm talking to a man who is a parent, it means I'm talking to a parent. I'm not just talking to a man. When I go to the police and I'm talking to a male police officer, I'm not talking to a man, I'm talking to a man in authority and responsibility called a police officer. When I'm talking to a parliamentarian, I'm not talking to the parliamentarian because he's a man, but because he's an elected official who has responsibility to deliver laws for all citizens. So I think what done is to transfer, institutionalize the collective power and responsibility and personalize it to the male identity. And that's what patriarchy does. And that's what we need to shift so that when we are talking to a minister, I don't have to be so happy that I met with a minister. In fact, the minister must be happy that the minister met with so many women because that's their mandate. So at times we've made and ourselves feel privileged and honored and humbled to be amongst men, when actually, no, we are just citizens with equal responsibility, equal opportunity, and we need to reframe the premise of engagement. So as AU Goodwill Ambassador on ending child marriage on the continent, when I'm in that room with the 50-something heads of states, I'm not talking to 55 men. I'm talking to 55 elected individuals who have a responsibility to deliver human rights for their citizens.
Love it.
We must reframe power.
The
moment we reframe power, we are able to be transformative.
Thank you so much.
I think we are still tinkering on power. Thank you very much.
I'm so with you, Nyaradzayi. Thank you so much. Carme, can I hand over to you, please, on this place of engagement of men?
Gracias por la pregunta y por el espacio. Ya somos una red feminista en Mesoamérica, en el sur de Asia, en el sur de África, Estados Unidos. Y nuestro trabajo es más construcción feminista de movimientos. Tenemos clara una apuesta de trabajo con mujeres, liderazgo de mujeres. Pero sí creemos que el cambio no viene solas. Necesitamos también que los hombres transformen ese tema de poder. Nayara lo dijo muy bien, Cindy también. Lo que estamos cuestionando las feministas es el poder, es el abuso del poder de los hombres por su rol asignado. Hay compañeros con los cuales estamos mano a mano trabajando. Yo soy madre de un joven de 26 años. Y yo lo he educado de una manera distinta. Pero el contexto, el entorno, la narrativa tiene mucho poder. Que aunque yo como madre he intentado hacer cosas distintas, esa narrativa les ofrece a los hombres un modelo de masculinidad que es, alguien lo decía, que es tóxico, que es negativo para ellos, pero para nosotras fundamentalmente. Por eso en este momento hay un tema que nos preocupa en la región y creo que también pasa en otras regiones, que es la violencia al interior de los movimientos sociales y esos hombres que se supone que son nuestros aliados en la defensa de la tierra y territorio, que son nuestros aliados entre las extractivas, y resulta que son hombres que en su casa abusan del poder, abusan de sus compañeras o en la organización. Berta Cáceres lo tenía clarísimo. Yo estoy luchando contra el extractivismo, contra el patriarcado y contra el racismo, es decir, esa interseccionalidad de las discriminaciones. Entonces, lo que queremos de los hombres, tenemos que trabajar con hombres. No, está claro, la sociedad hay hombres, mujeres, como decía Cindy, el binario, pero bueno, somos diversos y os necesitamos. Yo me acuerdo hace 20 años, el grupo de hombres contra la violencia en Nicaragua me invitó como red de mujeres a hablar sobre qué podían hacer ellos. Y yo me acuerdo que dije una frase que la sigo pensando, que es: salgan del closet. Es decir, necesitamos que los hombres que luchan por una igualdad de género no se escondan, no les dé vergüenza, sino que hablen y que en sus espacios de familia, sus espacios de trabajos, defiendan esa igualdad. Es decir, porque tenemos que cambiar la narrativa y yo creo que el rol que es grande y que necesitamos es la prevención. Es decir, nosotras desde el movimiento feminista estamos pidiendo atención a las víctimas y sobrevivientes, la sanción de la violencia, de los agresores, pero tenemos que trabajar en la prevención también, si no, nunca vamos a llegar a tiempo. Y es cierto, me acuerdo también que otra compañera nos decía, ¿qué queremos? ¿Cada vez más hombres en las prisiones o la prevención de la violencia? Queremos justicia para las víctimas y sobrevivientes, pero queremos prevenir la violencia. Y ahí ustedes, los hombres que trabajan por la igualdad de género, tienen un papel a jugar, desde sus roles, desde sus organizaciones. Y yo creo que eso es lo que queremos. Insisto, soy madre de un varón, de un hombre, de un chavalo joven, y yo lo que quiero es caminar con él, y yo estoy caminando con él, pero él también necesita modelos distintos, que a veces están, como digo yo, en el closet, escondidos, ¿no? Entonces, creo que queremos eso, creo que debemos trabajar juntos y juntas, y creo que también, como decía Nayara, el lenguaje crea ideología. Eso es algo que las feministas lo tenemos claro desde el inicio. El nombrarnos es fundamental y el nombrar las cosas por su nombre. Matrimonio infantil es violencia, es abuso, es incesto, es... Gracias. Yo si no me animo y hablo demasiado. Gracias.
No, Carme, it was poetry, listening to you, and incredibly moving. Because all of us have, I guess, have had a father or father figures. We've had brothers, some of us the privilege of sons, had grandparents who include grandfathers. Men and women and non-binary people have loving, intimate relationships. This surely can't be about excluding, but rather broadening the basket, opening the doors of the closet. Indeed, so people can self-identify with gender equality and non-violence. Carlos, can I just ask you to tell us how you see the place of engagement of men and boys, but also one of our gorgeous contributors from Rwanda has challenged us to tell a constructive story as well, to recognise that patriarchy is pretty tough on men as well. It's very hard for men, and can we speak a little more of that, perhaps to balance out the picture? Thank you so much, Carlos.
Merci, Kate. Je crois que quand on regarde la façon dont les chefs d'État en Afrique gouvernent les pays, ils ont toujours utilisé cette stratégie pour détourner en fait le reste de la population des enjeux principaux, surtout quand il s'agit de parler des enjeux relatifs aux droits des femmes, même en ce qui concerne les besoins de base. Et cette année, avec cette pandémie de la COVID, on l'a vu encore plus avec le chef d'État, l'ancien chef d'État aux États-Unis, donc qui tenait son discours et qui ne statuait pas vraiment sur les principaux enjeux qui affectaient en fait les droits des minorités, incluant bien sûr les femmes. Mais ce qui était aussi intéressant dans cette dynamique-là, c'est comment nous avons vu qu'à travers le mouvement MeToo et le mouvement Say Her Name, il y avait quand même beaucoup d'hommes qui se sont joints à ces grandes marches-là et qui, aux côtés des femmes, ont crié que assez, c'est assez. Il n'est pas il n'est pas question de genre ici, mais il est question de voir comment ensemble nous pouvons faire respecter les droits des personnes, des êtres humains et surtout des femmes qui sont victimes à tout point de vue. Et donc, quelque part, le discours que tenait l'ancien président des États-Unis n'a pas seulement renforcé en fait les aspects du patriarcat, mais ça a permis à beaucoup d'hommes de se réveiller aussi et de commencer à se questionner sur ces enjeux-là, de commencer à questionner leur rôle en tant qu'homme, en tant que père de famille, en tant que mari, mais en tant que personne masculine bénéficiant en fait de tous ces privilèges que les sociétés ont structurés et ont mis en place en faveur des hommes. Donc ça, c'est un aspect. L'autre aspect aussi que je voulais souligner ici, c'est comment cette question de masculinité est aussi discutée dans les espaces. Quand par exemple on parle de les hommes sont responsables en fait de tout ce qui arrive aux femmes. Les hommes ont tous les privilèges et tout ça. Mais il faut aussi comprendre que dans la catégorie, la composante des hommes en eux-mêmes, il y a un aspect dans leur parcours qui a manqué au niveau éducatif. Il y a beaucoup d'hommes qui sont aux prises avec des traumatismes dus à des violences au sein de leur famille. Je partageais ma propre expérience moi-même quand j'étais encore enfant, mais aussi en tant qu'homme queer. Et donc, dans ce débat, dans cette conversation, d'aller chercher des alliés auprès des hommes féministes et tout ça, c'est de se questionner aussi par rapport à ce traumatisme-là. Qui répond à ces traumatismes que les hommes ont vécus? C'est de regarder aussi pourquoi les hommes perpétuent ces violences-là, malgré tout le mouvement féministe qui prend de l'ampleur d'un bout à l'autre du monde. Quelle est la place que les hommes peuvent occuper dans tout ce débat-là? Comment les hommes peuvent exprimer en fait leur alliance, leur soutien aux côtés des femmes, si eux-mêmes leurs violences, les impacts des violences qu'il y a eu dans leur vie ne sont pas résolus. Je pense qu'en matière de coordination, c'est là que le creux est encore très grand et aussi longtemps que ces traumatismes-là, qui n'est pas un accompagnement des hommes pour pouvoir régler ces traumatismes, leur donner un espace sécuritaire où ils peuvent exprimer en fait ces traumatismes qu'ils ont vécus sans honte. S'il n'y a pas d'espace sécuritaire où ces hommes-là peuvent dire il faut que je déconstruise en fait ce que j'ai subi. S'il n'y a pas d'espace sécuritaire où les hommes gays et autres hommes qui ont des rapports sexuels avec les hommes ne peuvent pas vraiment avoir une voix pour eux aussi comprendre comment déconstruire les mécanismes qui ont été mis sur place au moment où ils étaient en train de se découvrir leur identité de genre. Je pense que ça va être problématique de pouvoir engager ou d'avoir des hommes qui vont facilement embarquer dans le féminisme. Il est évident que le féminisme est la solution à tout point de vue. Il est évident que le féminisme est l'un des aspects fondamentaux qui vont permettre de pouvoir pouvoir adresser la question du patriarcat au sein du mouvement LGBT, mais aussi longtemps que cet espace sécuritaire n'est pas facilité aussi bien par les femmes que par d'autres hommes qui ont compris en fait ces enjeux-là et qui ont le langage de pouvoir les utiliser. S'il n'y a pas cette force conjuguée de part et d'autre, je crois qu'il sera difficile. Mais je me réjouis de voir en fait que de plus en plus dans le mouvement LGBT, il y a beaucoup d'hommes qui se tiennent debout en tant que féministes et qui sont prêts à se tenir aux côtés des femmes lesbiennes et des personnes transgenres, surtout les femmes transgenres, pour pouvoir développer ce mouvement féministe-là. Et je pense que c'est un aspect assez fondamental à considérer si on veut adresser les enjeux qui renforcent en fait les différents angles du patriarcat.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much, Carlos, and for speaking inside an intersectional narrative of identity and place. Your voice is extraordinarily moving and inspiring, actually. And off the back of that, Sanam, I wonder if I can ask you to take the floor on this question of where do you think men and boys engagement fits in? How do you see it? What's the right narrative or construct? And then I have a very special question for you. People want to know how to join your feminist book club. I'm telling you right now, I'm getting hundreds and hundreds of requests. Okay, one, but behind it, I do know there's hundreds and hundreds. Can we have the book list? How can we join in?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to tweet out the book list. And let me also say that a book club is not uniquely mine. You can start yours and do this. I think one of the things that we forget is that feminist and social justice movements are challenging a system and a hierarchy of power. And that means that I don't need to be the central organizer of anything. And this is what oppressive tyrants don't also understand about the guerrilla type of movements, right? They think that if they take down the leader, the whole thing is going to fall apart. It is never that. It's because every one of us is an equal organizer, and we know what the plan is, and we know what the goal is, and we have the love and the commitment and the solidarity to do it, that we keep organizing beyond what dictators and fascists and tyrants even understand. So I think that's also kind of in response to one of the questions that came up in the chat about how do you address that criticism that when feminism is trying to be anti-men. It's not. It's really about this structure of power that has lasted for thousands of years, and we're trying to make our way around out of it. And when you think about it this way, I think we come to what you're asking here about this role of men and transformative masculinities. And I think one of the deeper challenges, which was touched upon earlier, is that the funding, the practical nuts and bolts is just so little. And the space that women themselves have is not that much. When you come from a conservative family, conservative society, you know that we don't even have public space to organize. We don't meet. We're being told to stay at home because we're supposed to be at home, because we're supposed to be good, because we're supposed to look after our families, because we're supposed to study, whatever it is. We don't have space to organize. And then it becomes competitive to say that, oh, let's make sure that we also make space for men and boys in feminist organizing. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't happen. Of course it should. Patriarchy hurts men too, in creating violence and making them perpetrators of violence, in giving them this a ridiculous level of expectation of performance. And I think that's where we link pain, that's where we link male suicide and loneliness. I share with you one small anecdote where I was commenting to some of my male friends that one thing that I've noticed as a woman going into social spaces is that even if you're a stranger at a restaurant or a bar, especially in the bathroom, women will check on each other. Do you need this? Are you okay? Are you sick? Anything like that. And my male friends were just like, oh, well, why don't you do that for men? And I was just like, nobody's stopping you from doing that for yourselves. We are doing this because we are aware of the danger that we are facing. And if you participate in our organizing and our culture and our sort of questioning of why should it be like this, then you can start doing this for each other as well. And that, I think, is what is really key. One thing that's really wonderful about being in this point in time is that at least we have had great activists and great leadership before us who have not only set example for us to learn from, but they've created the language for us. Gender performativity, microaggression, these were terms that I did not know when I was in school, and I needed these terms to explain what is being done to me, what is being done to all sorts of people, not just across gender lines, but also across caste, across race, across indigeneity. They're feeling this weight of oppression and marginalization, and we weren't able to speak about that in a coherent way. And now we have the research, the data, the statistics, the connections, and the movements to really fight in a combined way with each other. And that's where I see the role of transformative masculinities and engaging men and boys comes in. It's bringing together these elements and making sure that we learn from each other and we transform power together.
Sanam, you are just a sensation. You're so good, you're scary. Thank you so very much for lifting us, despite being the last speaker, and bringing us all together as a panel. You've picked up on the richness of the conversation, and you've challenged us to bring great energy and inspiration and personal responsibility to it. Our lovely participants online, including that gorgeous gang in Rwanda, have asked us a couple of tough questions, and let me just share them. One, let me start with this one. Somebody has said, look, even the name MenEngage is a bit of a problem. And I was thinking to myself, well, and actually the questioner said, well, you're not going to have an organization called Against White Power. You're not going to put that out there easily, although perhaps it's well past due. What do you... well past due. But what do you think about the narrative of MenEngage on the one hand? And on the other hand, here's an interesting question. Is the question of empathy, of emotional intelligence in our struggle to find common ground and to bring people forward to something less violent, less competitive, less hostile, are we lacking focus on empathy and emotional intelligence? So I'm just going to throw those two out there from our gorgeous participants online, and tell me who's ready to jump in on either or both of those.
I'd really like to jump in on talking about MenEngage and sort of...
Sorry, Anya, thank you. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah. This idea, because it's something, I want to make a note that I'm speaking, as a representative of the CoFem network. And the Coalition for Feminists for Social Change is a global network of feminists, thought leaders, practitioners, really looking at people working on violence against women and girls. And, when we talk about this so often, is that absolutely, as I said before, you need active participation of all, segments of society, including men and boys. But it has to be done carefully and with strong accountability to women and girls, especially when you're talking about gender-based violence and you're talking about violence against women and girls. We need to look far more at the idea of having less principles, maybe, and focusing more on practice. And how do you take those principles to practice? Because one of my and CoFem struggles with MenEngage has been at the top level, the principles are there, the conversations are happening. But when you start moving down and you start seeing it, how it's manifesting in the country level, it becomes a different story. And that is where the struggle often is how do we put some of these ideas and these principles we have into actual practical steps? I'd like to offer three things we've been thinking of. The first is we have to overcome this idea that it works to change the views of individuals, and particularly individual men. And we need to start working more towards the need to overcome structural inequality. So we need to stop depoliticizing GBV work, to attract people to participate. We have to center accountability to women and girls. Otherwise, what we're going to do is contribute to gender inequality, which is at the center of why gender-based violence exists. I've seen people in Sri Lanka, MenEngage participants, who sat on all male panels. And you're like, how is this working? It's about also putting into practice these principles in your every day and in the structures and the institutions. The second thing I wanted to bring up was, we need to center it around the lived experiences of women, relating to them as individuals deserving of full human rights, and not just in their roles as mothers, wives, and daughters. So, again, with COVID-19, you're looking at this idea of how do we talk about unpaid care work, and, women are taking on the burden, and it's still centered around the idea. So even if I'm not a wife or a mother, I still deserve, equal consideration in this programming. I still deserve a conversation. Domestic violence doesn't just happen to wives and mothers. It also happens to girls and children. And how do we, stop trying to engage this idea that doesn't center the full lived experiences of women and girls? And a lot of this can be done, just by being a little bit more accountable. Yes, absolutely, organizations like MenEngage have a decentralized structure, but it's also antithetical to the reason they exist. Because you create programming, you push it through your individual members, you fundraise on behalf of your members. So that we need to really rethink through how we center, these lived experiences of women and girls who are experiencing this in an honest and open way, because we all have the same goal, right? At the end of the day, what we want to do is get there better and get there together. And finally, the third thing I just want to say is it's also about being guided by and accountable to women at all levels, whether it's from the individual through to the organizational and the structural. Because as I said, when male allies don't follow or engage with women and women-led GBV efforts, you're reinforcing gender inequality, right? You're perpetuating
exactly.
it. And you absolutely have to do that from the beginning. As you're developing programs, center it from the beginning, not just at the end, when you're panicking and you need to consult someone.
Thank you, Sharanya. Thank you so very much. Sanam, I think you wanted to come on board on this question of empathy, MenEngage as a construction. And somebody else, actually, while Sharanya was talking, said, well, I've even seen men who are supporting feminism and identifying as feminists being celebrated for their support rather than just being accepted as doing what they should do. What do you think, Sanam, please?
So on the last point, I have to say that we cannot give awards for doing the bare minimum all the time, especially when sometimes you see male leaders will say something and a female person in a similar position has already said that, but either nobody paid attention to her or she got threats and attacks and told to go home and go cook and so on and so forth. There is data on, for example, how female parliamentarians are regularly getting rape threats, death threats, getting harassed by their own colleagues in the parliamentary and legislative spaces. So while I definitely think it's important for more male leaders and people in positions of power, not just male, but in terms of whiteness, in terms of different types of structures of power, for them to step up and say no to oppression and discrimination, we cannot just be like, yay, you said that Dalits belong in India. No, I think we're asking for a lot more than that, and we have a human rights framework that is very clear on what we're expected to deliver, from just the general culture change that we're seeing, as well as the basics of public goods and services and rights and everyday freedoms that we're expecting to see. But to go from that harsh point to the question of empathy, I really love this question, because I was just saying to colleagues from MenEngage last week that one of the things that movements for social justice, not just feminist movements, have is that power of empathy and that power of love and kindness. We have something that I genuinely don't think that oppressive groups and oppressive leaders have at all. In fact, there is that point about power corrupting, and the fact that you reduce in empathy and reduce in emotional understanding the longer you're in a position of power. And I also reflect on something that really influenced me, this thinking that patriarchy has tricked us into thinking that romantic love is the highest form of love. And it is not. The greatest form of love is solidarity, because it is the most unselfish form of love. It's that type of love that you don't know someone, but you know that somewhere across the world, something terrible is happening, that people are marching on the streets to shout out the name of a Black lesbian human rights defender who has been murdered. And you say that you're not going to accept that. And people think that it doesn't mean anything, even if you're one person on the street. And of course, it does matter, because as the podcast, The Guilty Feminist, if you've ever come across it, pointed out, the people in power are watching to see how outraged are we, how much are we willing to risk to step out. So every moment that we step forward and step out and show our empathy and show our love and show our solidarity for others, and use our privilege to speak out and step up and be there no matter how far away and no matter how much we don't share that lived experience, that's what makes us powerful, and that's what brings us, I think, hope. It's not just the fact that these movements exist, the fact that we're alive and we're listening and we're telling stories and we're documenting her story, right? Where we're acknowledging the truth and the reality of the lived experiences of the oppressed, and that's something that history hasn't been very good at doing. And the fact that we're doing this radical revolutionary thing is coming from this place of empathy and love. And I very much agree that empathy and emotional equivalent intelligence and love really is so important in the work that we're doing.
Sanam, it's just so important what you say. I feel that because we've all been so anxious to get our heads around this complicated, intertwined, interdependent world, we forget that at the heart of it is a struggle for humanity, not for femininity or masculinity, but humanity, and how we enter into that space of mutual affirmation, love and regard, far above these narrow ideas that you so powerfully described. My gorgeous panelists, time is nearly running out, and I want to keep the conversation going, but without running over time. And let me just say thank you again to the wonderful contributions that have come online, and most movingly from Rwanda. And we thank you so much for hanging out with us. It's been fabulous. But listen, as we go around and think about a sort of a final message from this extraordinary plenary, which I predicted would be the best ever, and I believe I was right. Well, it doesn't matter what I was. My point is, you lot are fantastic. So I want to give you all a magic wand, if only. If you did have a magic wand and you could wave it around and bam, make something appear, what's the single most important thing you would like to see change in our journey to establish a lived truth for the human rights of everybody under all circumstances? A magic wand. Carme, can I throw to you, Carme, for picking up a final reflection,
sin
anything you
problema,
like. Yeah.
Ajá. No sé, a ver, one second. No sé si a lo mejor Nayara, ahorita que está conectada, quiere hablar, porque como ella aparece y desaparece, I don't know if it's, and I can talk later. If you want, I don't know. I can. Yo puedo si quieren.
No, go ahead, Carme.
Okay,
it's okay.
Perfect.
If you're comfortable to go ahead,
yes,
it would be fantastic.
Perfect. Sorry for my Spanglish. Si tuviera una varita mágica, ¿qué pediría? Que los hombres no toleren ninguna discriminación ni violencia. Eso es lo que pediría, como aliados, como compañeros de camino y de lucha. Que no la toleren en la casa, en la cama, en la cocina, en la comunidad, en el movimiento. ¿Por qué? Porque eso es lo que hemos dicho siempre las feministas. El feminismo entra a la cama, a la cocina, a la casa, al jardín, donde sea. Es decir, no es algo que tú dejas en la puerta, sino que implica una transformación de nuestras relaciones y de nuestra manera de actuar. Implica abandonar privilegios, implica abandonar poder. Eso es fundamental. Es decir, el feminismo nos cuestiona los privilegios, nos cuestiona los poderes que tenemos. Y quisiera también recuperar una palabra, una reflexión de Cindy, donde decía poner siempre en el centro a las víctimas y sobrevivientes, es decir, a las personas que están afectadas por las inequidades, ¿no? Sean las de género, sean las de raza, sean las culturales, la de opción sexual. Es decir, la voz y quien nos debe orientar son las personas que están viviendo o sobreviviendo de esa situación. Eso para mí es fundamental, es decir, necesitamos, en esta lucha nos necesitamos todas y todos, cada uno con roles distintos, pero a los hombres, al MenEngage, a la organización, les pediría eso, que los hombres no callen, combatan y cambien y no toleren. Es la única manera que vamos a poder conseguir realmente un cambio. Que ha habido muchos avances, por supuesto, pero aún nos queda mucho camino por hacer, ¿no? Entonces, gracias por el espacio.
That was beautiful. It's personal, it's intimate, and yet were it to take hold globally, the world could change on a dime. It absolutely would be magic. Nyaradzayi, if you had a magic wand.
If I had a magic wand, I would say Kate, Carlos, Cindy, Sanam, Sharanya, Carme, and our brother doing the sign language. Let's extend the time, but I don't have that magic word to extend the time. Just some fantastic. Just stepping back from the doing. We spend a lot of time doing, and then just to do reflections and thinking and repositioning. This has just been so extraordinary. What I would do next is really be very bold around issues of class and patriarchy. I am a global leader who has lived in Geneva, been in the UN, and I now live in my village. And I just realized that we, at times, even ourselves, we should not ask who, we should not say, do not leave someone behind, leave no one behind. We should ask, why are we leaving some people behind? Not that leave no one behind, but why are we, including in civil society? The class issue is real. We are more technocratic. As Zimbabwean colleagues were also asking me, at times we are not connected with the communities that we work with. And at times poor men are equally victims of patriarchy, because patriarchy has moved the power and resource distribution to the middle class and elite men. And therefore the poor men transfer their frustration to the poor women. And violence is a cycle and it perpetuates. So we need to look into the totality of how patriarchy operates. And the magic word for me would also that for Africa, it's also about coloniality and colonial language and thinking living in rural areas does not mean that we don't have wisdom or knowledge or expertise. It just means we don't speak French or English or Portuguese, and therefore does not necessarily mean that people don't have knowledge. So a magic word for me would be reaffirming the knowledge and the experience of people as their starting point, and then repositioning the conversation. And lastly,
Thank you.
the world is not.
Oh. I'm sorry, Nyaradzayi. I'm going to come back to you if we get you back online. Carlos, if you had a magic wand, wave it for me.
Merci, Kate. Merci à toutes les panélistes et tout ça. C'était vraiment un honneur pour moi d'être aux côtés d'aussi brillantes femmes qui sont à travers le monde et d'apprendre aussi davantage dans le cadre de mon travail. Je pense que le bâton magique, pour moi, est en train de déjà faire son petit bonhomme de chemin. Je le dis parce que il y a quelques années, je n'entendais pas du tout le discours du féminisme au sein du mouvement LGBT. Je n'entendais pas du tout parler de certains hommes gays, bisexuels et hommes qui ont des rapports sexuels avec d'autres hommes qui se présentaient comme féministes dans différents espaces. Je n'entendais pas non plus parler de d'autres organisations non LGBT qui voulaient soutenir en fait le mouvement LGBT et comprendre davantage quels sont les enjeux sur lesquels il faut travailler pour appuyer toute la question d'éducation des hommes et des garçons. Mais aujourd'hui, nous avons des personnes au sein du mouvement LGBT. Nous avons non seulement des femmes lesbiennes qui sont féministes, nous avons des femmes trans qui sont féministes, mais nous avons aussi des hommes cisgenres et gays qui, sans honte, parlent à haute voix et utilisent le mot féministe. Et nous avons cette organisation-là à travers le Global MenEngage qui, non seulement dans ses principes, a clairement mentionné l'appui et le soutien qu'il apporte au mouvement LGBT dans le travail pour mieux comprendre ce que c'est que le patriarcat, mais aussi les masculinités patriarcales. Donc, ce genre d'alliance est en train de se mettre sur pied. Et pour moi, c'est ça, ce bâton magique-là sur lequel nous devons nous servir comme tremplin.
Yes! Gorgeous. I'm going to find one for you.
Dans ce travail
Cindy!
de féminisme. Et je pense que toutes les voix ici réunies, nous pouvons le faire. Sanam parlait tout à l'heure de solidarité. Et je pense que le féminisme, moi personnellement, m'a fait comprendre qu'au-delà du genre féminin, il y a cet humanisme-là, il y a cet élan de solidarité vers lequel nous devons tendre. Et il y a beaucoup de choses que le féminisme peut nous permettre de comprendre et surtout pourra permettre au mouvement LGBT de penser ses plaies, de pouvoir guérir de ces traumatismes et de pouvoir être aux côtés des femmes, mais aussi en tant qu'hommes, de pouvoir nous reconstruire.
Thank you, Carlos. And I'm so sorry to shut you off. It's just that I need to fit in 3 more speakers, I think. And Cindy, may I go to you with a magic wand? Thank you.
I'll be very brief. And there's so much magic that's been passed around. Poof, we believe that it's possible, that we can be different, that the systems we're in are and can be different, and we can transform them. I don't expect that our world will be perfect. I've seen a lot of questions about, how do you do this? How do we engage? How do we disrupt patriarchy? We do it. We try. We get it wrong. We get it wrong a lot. And we call each other out, and we have the systems, the practices, the relationships, going back to that kind of the importance of kind of love and relational intelligence. The world now really calls on us to be able to build a deeper level of relationality and interconnectedness, even though we can't physically connect. That's critical in our organizing. So my magic wand will help us build those structures and practices for accountability.
Absolutely gorgeous. Thank you so very much. Sanam, magic wand coming to you.
Oh, I have such a wish list. Oh my God. Take all the money from Jeff Bezos and all the billionaires and set up global healthcare and pension systems, end all the conflict, make all the arms and all the weapons disappear so the conflict just cannot take place anymore, shut down all the extractivism and start the rewilding process so our climate can recover, shut down ExxonMobil and all of the fossil fuel companies so they're extinct. Like all of these things would make our structures of patriarchy get dismantled, our structure of neoliberal capitalism dismantled. They work together, and that's kind of what I would do. But I think going back, as Carme was speaking, I really thought of Audre Lorde because she was speaking of silence, and that last thought, I think, is to remind ourselves is your silence will not protect you is such a fundamental part of our work, because no matter how small you are, even if it's just at your home and within your family, within your community, there will be a moment in that you could have spoken up, whether it's to say that, you don't need to speak to that child that way. You don't need to tell a boy not to cry, whatever it is. There is always a moment for you to challenge masculinity, and silence, I think, is the thing that we need to break. I recently read a piece where a woman was sharing her experience of growing up in a conservative patriarchal family, and I related to that so much because patriarchy promises to protect you. Patriarchy promises that you will be safe at home. You the boogeyman rapist is not going to get you, but actually the rapist is in your home, and that was the message of that inspiring Chilean anthem last year, La Violador eres tú. So silence, I think, is something that we need to smash along with all of the other structures. And I leave everyone with that message. Speak up, use your space, use your voice.
Thank you. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. Sharanya, sorry.
That's all right. Very quickly, the good news is the magic wand we want to offer as CoFem is what we've already said. And we're going to we've put our feminist pocketbook in the chat, which tells you how you can do it. So it's just basic 3 asks, right? Focus on overcoming structural gender equality rather than changing individual views. Center on the lived experiences of women, relating to them as individuals, as full human rights, and be guided by and accountable to women at all levels, from the individual right through to the organizational structural. And I just want to end by saying that, panels like this inspire you so much because you realize another world is being built and it is coming through. And I'm reminded of the words of Arundhati Roy, where she says, another world is not only possible, she's on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. And I think very much I can hear her breathing right now.
And it's on that note that we come to a close of our best ever plenary session of anything ever you've ever been to. It's been made brilliant because of our gorgeous panelists, the extraordinary work of MenEngage, the unbelievable questions, including from the gorgeous team in Rwanda. Team Rwanda, you are something else. And frankly, Reddy, if I had a magic wand, I tell you what I'd be doing. I'd be making Sanam and Sharanya co-Secretary General of the United Nations. And I'd be doing it right now, right away, and I'd be shutting myself up and handing back to you. I don't need a wand for that. But thank you, everybody. Thank you, gorgeous interpreters, translators. Thank you so much. You are bloody-sational. The sign language interpreters, I love you. And thank you, everybody. Back to you, Rebbe. Thank
you so very much. Thank you, Kate, for that spirited moderating and really making us come alive. And obviously, I'm like a mother or father who loves all her or his children. So all our panels were absolutely fantastic. But I understand what Kate means. We had some formidable speakers. And, I always learn so much about the space that we work in, the world that we are trying to build, the conversations that we're trying to have. And I think the panel was so bold in actually going and in interrogating the term MenEngage. I actually did sit up, and they always say that the organizations or even initiatives that perform the best are those that are able to put a mirror to their faces and even interrogate themselves and interrogate their own identities as well. So very privileged to be in your company, even though we are doing it virtually.